Alrighty, well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And on the program, we welcome back our returning champion, Małgorzata Kulbaczewska-Figat, who is a Polish independent journalist, immigration worker, and part of the editorial team and frequent host of Cross Border Talks, which covers all European affairs, but specifically at times a special focus on Eastern European affairs, and always through a critical left perspective. And she has also had articles published in Transform Europe and was once associated, once upon a time, with the Barricade, a pan-Eastern European left-wing news outlet. But this is not our all things Eastern European affairs. We are going to talk about Ukraine, but we will mostly be talking about Germany. So it's actually our all things Germany episode. And yeah, Malgorzata and I will talk about the superpower of the EU and major player in NATO affairs, and arguably a global superpower, though not in a good way. So, firstly, Malgorzata, welcome back to One Plus One.
It's very nice to be back on the program. Hello, everybody.
Yes, and it's an honor to be speaking to you again. Now, before we talk about German affairs and the recent German election, I'm curious, what do you think about the potential and possibly strong possibility that the Russian-Ukrainian war, NATO proxy war with Russia and Ukraine, might be drawing to might be drawing to a close? I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, I am disgusted by what is the American administration doing. This is my first thought because what was supposed to suggested to Ukraine as the deal of the minerals is in fact a colonial deal. The first version was a colonialism pure and simple to deprive Ukraine of the profits that could once help the country to then finance the reconstruction. That was absolutely disgusting for me. And what happened afterwards is not better because it turns out that for the last 2-3 years, the United States kept telling the Ukrainians, just keep going. We will be standing with you all the time. We will secure your victory. We will not abandon you. And in the end, they basically tell them now, okay, guys, now we strike a deal with someone else. We will talk to Putin and you give up your territory. You give up your territory. You forget about all your people killed in this war, and you also forget about any security guarantees. As for the NATO, I had never illusions that Ukraine would be ever accepted in the alliance. But anyway, what is now happening for me is it is like it turns out that those who were saying that for the United States, Ukraine is not a value in itself and Ukrainian people's lives are not a value in itself, but instead Ukraine is a tool to bleed Russia out. Now, well, these people were right from the very beginning. So Ukraine was never had a price in itself. There were never any great humanist values behind the American support. There was big world global politics in which Ukraine got a role for some time, and now it turns out that this role is coming to an end. And what the Ukrainian people may think of that really doesn't matter to anybody in Washington or in the White House or in Moscow, by the way.
And actually, that's a perfect segue to my follow up question, which is, what do you think will be the likely outcome, and what do you think is a just peace in Ukraine? Because I know you've worked with Ukrainians getting refugee status in Ukraine. These are Ukrainians fleeing the east when Russia invaded, and I'm curious, with your sources, I'm curious, what do the Ukrainians you speak to, what do they think is a just peace in Ukraine? And are there and the Ukrainians you've spoken to, that you've met, that you've even helped them get status in Poland, what has been the background of those Ukrainians? Are these Ukrainians who speak Ukrainian, go to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, or are these Ukrainians of a Russian background who speak Russian, goes to the Russian Orthodox Church, and in which Ukrainian might be their second language if they speak it at all? So I'm curious your response.
A lot of issues in one question. So let me try to start from the very beginning. If I forget something, just remind me.
Well,
Okay, so what is a just peace in Ukraine is a peace when Ukraine comes back to the borders it had before the war, because there is, like, for me, no reason for Ukraine to cede the territory to Putin's Russia. Not a single reason why Ukraine should be deprived of any regions. Second issue is that, for me, a just peace would be also a peace in which Ukraine is given conditions for reconstruction. And these are not conditions that are, as I mentioned previously, based on some colonial thinking, or let's say or like business driven reconstruction thinking. The Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian working people, suffered the most in this war, and if a peace is just, then also their interests should be prioritized. Of course, I am aware that in a capitalist world we are living, this is very much of a utopia, and the conferences on the reconstructions of Ukraine that we witnessed last year had really not much to do with this approach. But if you ask me what is a just peace, then I tell you this is what I consider a just peace of this war. Then on the attitudes of the Ukrainians, I am aware, and they are also very much aware, that Ukraine is not a fully independent player, and that also their fate, the fate of Ukrainian people, will not be in the center of attention. So among the people with whom I get in touch, there is, let's say, the attitude, let's stop this war, and even let's give up something, but let's stop this war, is more and more widespread. Like,
okay.
in the first year of war, it was really common for the Ukrainians to say that even if this country didn't do anything good for me or didn't offer me any good opportunities, then still I want to defend this country, and I want this country to fight till we restore the status quo from before 24 February 22. However, now there is more and more thinking among the Ukrainian people that, well, we are not able to win this. We are not able to achieve these aims. The support received from the West was not enough. Also, Ukrainians are also very much aware that some of this support was, well, stolen or disappeared in strange situations. There were really many corruption cases, even in the highest levels of Ukrainian administration and in the military as well. There was even a change of a minister of the military during the war, namely because of all these corruption stories that flourished in the Ministry of Defense and were never rooted out. So the Ukrainians are aware that this government, this administration, also didn't act in such a noble way as they wanted the world to believe it. Still, there is a feeling among the Ukrainians that they were attacked by a country whom they considered, if not a brotherly country, then at least a country which was close to them on many levels, cultural level, family level in many cases. And this adds an extra dimension of grief to this whole story. So even people who say, let's stop fighting now, let's accept some peace that can be achieved, they also say, we can't be sure what happens next. Perhaps Russia attacks again in a few years, especially that if now they have friends on the other side of the ocean, or if nobody wants to give us a serious security guarantees. And last but not least, in the first year of the war, most of people whom I met here, most of people whom I supported in settling down in Poland, said they wanted to go back. Now, approximately, I'd say it is, well, 6 out of 10 people with whom I talk say, no, I'm not going back. They want to stay here. They want to keep their children here. And they just say the opportunities for us, the options for safe life and decent wages are here in Poland, not in Ukraine. So
Wow.
let's say this will be a very profound effect of this war. I need to say that there will be really a mass of Ukrainian people who don't want to go to Ukraine. The demographic loss of Ukraine will be really huge, and these people will stay in Poland first of all, because Poland took the biggest number of the refugees, but they will stay in the European countries where they escaped in 22 and later. So this is another thing that we'll need to take into consideration.
And the Ukrainians and the Ukrainians you've worked with, are these Ukrainians in which Ukrainian is their first language and they go to the Ukrainian Orthodox church, or are these Ukrainians of a Russian background who speak Russian, goes to the Russian Orthodox Church, and Ukrainian might be their second language if they even speak if they even speak that at all? I'm curious.
Yeah, so actually I have encountered both types. And there is one thing about the church. Here in Poland, we have our own Polish Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
And generally it follows a don't ask, don't tell policy on the question of what church did you attend in Ukraine.
Okay. Yeah.
So the official line is that the Polish Orthodox Church has diplomatic relations, we can say, with the Russian Orthodox Church. With Ukrainian, no. But if somebody who attended only Orthodox Church of Ukraine now comes to a church in Poland and wants to take part in spiritual life, they will never ask him or her, what was your affiliation? They can simply join here and they are welcome. So, wow. Yes.
Well, before we get to Germany, let me just express my thoughts on Ukraine. For me, this would be a just peace in Ukraine. Russia withdraws its troops and goes back to the Russian border. East Ukraine is the Ukrainians of a Russian-speaking background, if you even want to call it that, they are given their linguistic rights, they're given their cultural rights, and has an arrangement with the rest of Ukraine, like what Catalonia, Galicia, and Basques have with Spain. And Ukraine is not doesn't become a member of NATO. It has a trade deal with the European Union, which even allows freedom of movement. I don't see how the Russians can object to that. For me, that would be a just peace. I think anything else is a tragedy. So I think if Eastern Ukraine becomes partitioned into one or two countries, which either become part of the Russian Federation or are internationally recognized by Russia and much of the international community, but not recognized by the Western world, the EU and NATO members, I think. But of course, Western Ukraine would become part of the Western Alliance and becomes part of both NATO and the EU formally. That to me, I think, would be a tragedy. But yeah, but it seems to me as if Ukraine becomes partitioned into two or three countries, then that is a tragedy. And I, of course, am going to solely blame Western imperialism and Western meddling in Ukraine, which created all of the clusterfuck of a situation that we see before us, which includes the Russian invasion. So,
well, we could then blame everybody. We could blame also Russia first of all, for abandoning the socialist idea and turning out into some kind of oligarchic nightmare, which
actually you can also blame on Western imperialism with the
yeah, but sure, yeah. Well, of course, and yeah, there is also much on the Western side to blame for treating Ukraine basically first as of a reservoir of a cheap labor force, which was the case before the war. Second, as a tool to use against Russia in some moment. Yeah. So we could only wish that in one moment Ukrainians can decide on themselves and make their own choices on where they want to belong and what lives they want to when they want to live. And this applies, of course, to both Ukrainian-speaking people of the Western Ukraine and the Russian-speaking people, the Russian-speaking citizens of Ukraine, because this is very important. And many of them speak Russians, but they don't feel Russian. They feel citizens of Ukraine whose first language is Russian. And yes, you are right to say that a just peace also includes, well, the right for everybody to be what they want to be, speak the language they want to speak without without an ideology that you now suddenly need to drop your identity because there are some bad people speaking the same language.
Well,
yeah.
as World Beyond War would say, Russia out of Ukraine, but NATO out of existence. And now let's talk about Germany. So, firstly, Małgorzata, remind our audience, those who might come from the U.S. and Canada and others in Britain, why what happens in Germany is very important to member states across the EU and NATO members in Europe, and talk a bit about Germany's role in the world, and then break down the very recent contentious elections that happened in Germany.
Yeah. So, yep. So if I am to sum up the story, so at the beginning, so last year, after the last elections, Germany had a coalition government called the Traffic Lights Coalition, because it consisted of the Green Party, the Social Democratic Party, which stands for the red light here, even if it is a bleak red, let's say. And the yellow one are the FDP party, so the Liberal Party. So this government was a very, let's say, problematic one from the very beginning, since there were key programmatic differences between the liberals and the Social Democrats in the first place. And in the end, they also collapsed because of the economy, because the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Christian Lindner, who comes from this liberal party, the FDP, namely blocked any concepts for more social spending, for more budgetary spending, because, well, it would be first against the liberals ideology, and secondly against also the German law regulation, which is called which like limit the number, or limit the public debt that can be taken. So the Chancellor Olaf Scholz wanted to invest more, even by bypassing this regulation on public debt. And the liberals, in a very dogmatic way, said, no, this won't happen. So in the end, the government collapsed. And we witnessed a very tense electoral campaign, which was centered namely around the issues of war, the issues of migration, and to a lesser extent also to the issues of economy and the so-called Energiewende, or the change in energy politics, which, because as you know, Germany switched from nuclear energy to renewable sources. They closed their nuclear power plants, and this was a move that is now heavily contested. There are more and more experts saying it was actually a big mistake to rely only on the renewable energy, the green energy.
Okay.
And so what was this electoral campaign was also marked by the rise of far right, or the AfD party, which, let's say it openly, this is a neo-fascist party. They are not alt-right, not a kind of, I don't know, alternative conservative party. They are something that we have already seen in Germany, and then we saw millions of dead people because of this ideology. So the AfD had a great success, maybe mainly about speaking on migration, by promoting the concept of, well, for limiting immigration into Germany, and also deporting all who don't fit in their definition of the German person. But they managed to win a lot of trust among people who, for different reasons, feel abandoned by the existing system. And this is a paradox, because their program has nothing to do with, I don't want to say socialism in this context. They even don't have anything with the welfare state or some, let's say, social populism. While there were indeed right-wing parties, there exist right-wing parties in Europe that promote some kind of solidarism for the members of one's nation, then the AfD is not one of them. Their program is neoliberal, just as in the case of their liberal opponents. but still they managed to persuade some part of the Germans who do not do so well that they will restore the national pride. They will stop Germany to say sorry all the time, and they will also offer better economic opportunities. So
Fascinating.
yes, yeah.
And actually, before asking another question, let me just also break it down for people. So, credits for this goes to People's Dispatch, American-based, brilliant left-wing news outlet, very internationalist and whatnot, on the 2025 German elections. Key issues to understand from Sunday's election. So the voter turnout was and this comes from their Instagram. So the voter turnout was 83%, remarkably higher than in 2021, 76.4%. The elections on that Sunday took place against the background of Germany's recession, a massive wave of hysteria around Russia and immigration, which drove up voter turnout. The AFD won 20%, doubling its vote share from 2021. The growth of the far right raises concerns of threats to migrant communities and the right to Islam. The AFD's xenophobic rhetoric has spread into the mainstream, raising alarms about what lies ahead. Despite winning the highest vote share of 28.5%, the conservative Christian Democratic Union, the CDU, the party of Merkel, received the party's second worst results since the founding of the Federal Republic in 1949. The Social Democrats, SPD, received its worst results in over 130 years, securing only 16.4% of the vote. An unexpected result, of course, was Die Linke, the left, which with 8.8% was able to increase its share of the vote by almost 4% and surpass the 5% needed to enter parliament. And the BSW, a split from Die Linke, the Bundessahara Wagenknecht, sorry if I'm butchering the German name of all of that, missed the 5% hurdle by just 13,500 votes. And the BSW's campaign was largely based on anti-militarism and a vision of social democratic market economics, although I have some issues with the party, which I'll get into later. Free speech under threat. The German elections also took place in the context of increased repression in response to the growth of the Palestine solidarity movement in the country. Cases have been reported of workers losing their jobs for expressing solidarity, while political groups face bans. Activists, artists, and academics are being disinvited from public events. Yanis Varoufakis, Ali Abunimah, and even Francesca Albanese, almost was not allowed into the country because of her brilliance speaking out against Palestine. And while the far right may not be part of the ruling coalition for now, it is the main opposition, and its discourse and policies continue to gain traction in mainstream parties and media. And of course, the AFD, no doubt, one can contribute to their huge success with Elon Musk, the owner of Twitter, giving them a big boost on X and whatnot. So all of that's very important. Something I wanted to ask you though, which is, can you comment how, despite the surge of Die Linke, overall this last German election was yet another crushing defeat of the left in the West? And actually, before you respond, let me also just say this, because firstly, Christian Democrats are the first place, largest party, and they are center right and they're economic liberals. The AFD, the far right, second place status, no doubt, because of Elon Musk manipulating German users on X, helps them immensely. Because who gives a shit about German corporate media, broadcast media, and state media being hostile to the AFD? Although largely, many are AFD light when it comes to scapegoating migrants, being pro-NATO, and not questioning the capitalist system and its many shortcomings. The Social Democrats, I'm even surprised both them and the Greens didn't lose more badly. But the SPD, which is supposed to be center-left, at least on socioeconomics domestically, but since the 90s, they are a center-right party and unleashed huge austerity on the German workers and working-class, precarious middle-class folks, along with the Greens. And the Greens are supposed to be left-leaning. There is an eco-socialist and anti-imperialist base and faction, but the Greens are green capitalists or green capitalists, are unbelievably pro-business. So they do a lot of greenwashing and fake green stuff. And the party, for a party centered on the environment, they sure do love militarism, primarily NATO, the pivot to Asia. They are imperialists, and the German Foreign Secretary, Annalena Baerbock, is utterly ghastly and is a wicked witch of Western imperialist goons that she serves in a nutshell. So we got two fake left parties which govern like hyper right-wingers. And Die Linke, which is supposed to be an alternative left party, but the World Socialist website has covered that many local and federal politicians of Die Linke support NATO and the pivot to Asia and austerity measures at home. But there are some good apples in that party. And they made major gains, but they certainly didn't displace the SPD or the Greens as the major left party to shape German affairs. But basically, safe to say what took place in Germany the past several months was a repeat of the 90s. The CDU, which has dominated German affairs for over a decade, people were hungry for a change, so they vote for a left or left-leaning folks, and they mobilized with the SPD and the Greens against a coalition, but all they got was austerity, more imperialism, and though sadly many Germans don't bother with the issue of imperialism, at least if you're part of the peace movement and anti-imperialist movement, you are back to square one or no squares at all with the German left, as this last major election again was a major victory for both the center rights and the far rights will be in opposition. The CDU is going to work with the SPD and possibly even the Greens themselves. It's actually the Free Democratic Party, the FDP, which again, this is another soft right liberal party, but they actually, I think they were actually the biggest losers. So your comments on all of this, because I was fairly down about what took place in Germany, especially since most Eastern German voters, a lot of them voted overwhelmingly for the AfD. So your response to all of this?
Yeah, again, a lot of stuff in one question, but yeah, let me first a brief comment on FDP. I'm actually very happy they are out of the parliament because it was mainly their behavior that led the traffic lights to collapse, and they opened the way to this conservative far-right victory, which is definitely a worse scenario for Germany, that the traffic light coalition with all its problems. With all the lacks of Olaf Scholz as a chancellor. By the way, I have to share here a personal experience with Olaf Scholz because I was able to listen to him live during a progressive forum in Berlin last June 24. And he was invited there as a special guest, and he was challenged by another special guest, the Albanian writer Lea Ipi, to go back to the roots of social democracy. She basically urged him to go back to what the first social democrats fought for, and which was basically socialism, a non-capitalist system, even though achieved by parliamentary means. And to, let's say, to everybody's disappointment, Olaf Scholz didn't even agree on that. These first social democrats actually are worth our respect, not to mention us getting inspired by them in any way. He basically kept saying that the times have changed, the politics have changed, and we need to look for something new. Well, he didn't find his something new until the end of his term. He also contributed to people turning their backs on the Social Democrats. So after this unsuccessful governance, and the government being unable to respond to the key economic issues, also by this catastrophic coalition with the Liberal Party, because I imagine that Olaf Scholz wanted to head a government and wanted to have a coalition with a majority of seats, but how he imagined that he will seek some common ground with the Liberal Party at the moment when somebody had to fight recession, well, sorry. I don't know. I don't know what he dreamed of, but it ended like it had to end. And I am happy that at least the voters punished the FDP very severely for sticking to the liberalism in such times as ours. So this is the first thing I wanted to say. Second thing is on Die Linke and the rise of Die Linke. Yeah, we were all very relieved on the left when seeing that they are in the parliament, because yet, let's say 2-3 months ago, it was really a scenario that we didn't want to speak out loud, but we had it in the back of the head that Die Linke may even not get into Bundestag, that they may end up with like 4%, 4.5%, and then all the left alternative is left outside of the mainstream, the main center of the political discourse. So that's why seeing how their polls started to rise in the last few weeks of the campaign, and then seeing their over 8% result, that was really a moment of true happiness for us all, that this effort is not lost. And I need to say that Die Linke really did a good campaign, a campaign that we could really expect from a left party in a liberal, or if you want, bourgeois democracy system. They really emphasized things that are important for the working people. They spoke of cheap housing. They spoke of they spoke of wages that need to rise. They spoke also that even in a situation when there is a war, it must not be that the working class pays for this war. So yeah, I'm happy that this effort was appreciated by the voters. I'm especially happy that it was appreciated by the voters of the younger generation, because among the youngest voters, Die Linke comes first. So there is a potential that must not be lost by the German comrades. But yeah, you are overall right. This victory, this election is a victory of the right, and it becomes even more. The picture becomes even darker when we realize what kind of people are now on the lead of the CDU. So it is not that a traditional conservative party comes first and some far-right people are behind them. No, the CDU's program has for some time already been mimicking what the AfD is standing for. What is a difference between them is that I think nobody from the CDU will say openly that there were good people even in the Gestapo, or that Adolf Hitler was a socialist. And those are things that were actually said by representatives of the AfD. So the CDU will not delve in this kind of historical nonsense, but in everything else, they are going to follow the far-right playbook. So there will be tax cuts. There will be more and more xenophobia. There will be more support for Israel. If you...
Wow.
Yes, there will be. I happened to visit Berlin. I was in Berlin a few times in 2024, and Israeli flags were exposed, were displayed in solidarity in the Rotes Rathaus in Berlin. So the red town hall, also in the Unter den Linden Avenue, and outside of Berlin as well. So when you know what is happening in Gaza, when you know what is happening to the Palestinians, it is really something that makes one wonder, have the Germans really studied their history, or they simply, turned some signs of the equation the other way around.
Yeah.
So, and what worries me the most with the rise of the right is that it is very likely that the migrants will now become the scapegoats for everything. And this is something, this is something that the German capitalists and the German conservatives don't like to speak about. But the German welfare state and the German's economic success also owes its existence to the cheap workforce that the Germans themselves brought in big numbers from Turkey, from the Arabic-speaking countries, from India, from other Asian countries, from African countries as well. And
even yours truly, Eastern Europe.
Yes, of course, and also from Ukraine that we mentioned earlier, but also from Romania, Bulgaria, my country, Poland as well. So it is absolutely unfair now to say that Germany has problems with the migrants. Capitalist system has problems when people get frustrated and when the workers are not given decent conditions of living. But it is not Germany which has problems with migrants. It is German capitalists who only cared about earning more. And it said and the German people of the higher classes, of the upper classes, didn't really care about what is going on. And now they are surprised why there are areas in Berlin where you hear more Arabic or Turkish in the street than German. Well, those are the areas where people live, these people who work for you as well.
Actually, do you want to actually?
So I can't. So when people rejoice that there will be some grand coalition that will stop the far right from getting into power, I can't really share this feeling. I feel that the far right words are well in the mainstream, and even if, as I said, even if the most odd historic absurdities are not repeated, then the practical part is repeated. Yeah. And yeah.
And I actually wanted to ask you, you know all of this, scapegoating of immigrants, both illegals and the legal ones in Europe. In Europe, I think it's important that that we emphasize that a lot of the xenophobia is not just directed at supposedly illegal ones, but it's also directed at legal immigrants, people who come from different EU countries to find better opportunity in Italy, in France, Germany, and so forth. And often far right folks and even liberal minded folks complain that that immigrants don't assimilate. Do you want to push back against that when it comes to Germany? Because I've also been to Berlin many times. I have family that's that's based there, and I think I can pretty much. I think it's safe to say that a lot of the people, a lot of the Turkish working class folks, Arabic working class folks, and South Asian working class folks, I think they've all assimilated pretty well into Germany. They speak German fluently and whatnot. So I just have to call bullshit to the immigrants, legal or otherwise, just aren't assimilating well enough. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I always wonder what does it mean to assimilate well enough. And well, if learning the language is not enough, then what else are we expected to do? I say we because I am also I am not a German person, so perhaps I also should behave in some special way when we're going to Germany. So well, I'd say that this is a very complex question, let's say. And as I can only basically repeat what I said earlier. There was some time, even in the West Germany, when Germany history, when the Turkish people were invited to come. Also the people from the former Yugoslavia. But not everybody knows this, that when Turkish people came, for example, to West Berlin, they were not allowed to settle down wherever they wanted. There were areas when they were supposed to stay. And it was even legally regulated for some time. So
wow,
I say, if first you take people into one place, you force them to stay together and not to merge too much with the local population, then how can you then be angry that they are not integrated enough? And thousands of them actually did a great effort to integrate, and they wanted to stay in Germany. They wanted their children to be German citizens. Now there are people of Turkish origin even on the highest level of politics. There are one of the ministers of the former government who belonged to the Green Party actually was a guy with Turkish name and last name. So, well, it's absolutely unfair to say that people are not integrated.
Well, in
Like,
fact, even Delinka, one of the most popular members of Delinka, whose name I'm completely blanking on now, but she is of Turkish background, so
yes, yeah, of course.
so
And yeah,
that's unbelievable. And like you, I'm actually quite shocked at just like how hostile Palestine solidarity is in Berlin. If you compare Berlin to Brussels, it's just like a night and day difference. Brussels, it's like you can walk around with the Palestinian, with the kafia and say
mhm.
loud and proud that you stand in solidarity with Palestine. Whereas in Berlin, anything that had that was remotely calling for solidarity with the Palestinians was all completely ripped apart and so forth. So it was
Yeah.
quite shocking. And well, my second to last question, is this, which is for some in the anti-imperialist movement, and for those who focus solely on that topic, many expressed sadness, although I don't know why, about the BSW led by Sahara Wagenknecht, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering her name. Her party, the Bündnis Sahara Wagenknecht, didn't get the votes needed to even be a member of parliament or have members. Why do you think that is? And then before you do explain that, let me just say, yes, she is a very good anti-imperialist. She's one of the few that unapologetically speaks out against NATO and so forth. But that being said, she also has some very, very problematic views, which are very far right, very transphobic and whatnot. And that's why, for me, no love lost that she, you know, didn't advance. But so I'm curious your response to why her party didn't advance at the last German election.
Okay, but before we get to Zahra Wagenknecht, let me come back to one issue that you also mentioned, but I didn't react.
Oh, okay.
That is the Eastern Germany and the
Yes,
East
yes.
Germany vote going for AfD. Yes, this is true. That if you look at the map of Germany, then the western part will be black, with some exception of a couple of green and red cities. And when you look at the east, there you see Berlin in many colors, but apart from that, the light blue, which stands for AfD. And in some of the areas of former Eastern Germany, the German Democratic Republic, indeed the supremacy of the AfD over other parties was really staggering. Like
Wow.
they got more than 2/3 of the vote in some of the places. But there are two things we need to take into consideration. First of all, it is absolutely untrue to say that the Eastern Germans who have the authoritarian background elected the far right, while the good Western people with democratic experience voted for democratic parties.
Okay. All
So
right.
first of all, Eastern Germany is smaller, both in territory and in terms of voters, than the Western Germany. So it is most of the votes come from the West, and in the West, the AfD actually came second as well. It is not visible on the map if you only mark the people's first choice, but the AfD came second overall in the former Western Germany, and it is not that Western Germany is immune to AfD, because there were all, for the first time, some of the electoral areas, some of the cities also voted from AfD in the West. So it is not some Eastern problem, but it is something that, well, emerges in the places that feel abandoned, that feel, that for some reason feel left behind. And it is not a coincidence that one of these cities that for the first time went for AfD in the majority was Gelsenkirchen, which is a city in the former Ruhr Basin, the former key industrial area of Germany, which underwent a coal phase out, which underwent a total industrial, let's say, transformation. And Gelsenkirchen was one of the areas most affected by the process. So
Interesting.
yeah, and secondly, if there is already a huge many books, many articles have been written on how the German unification was actually incorporation of the East to the West, and how Eastern economy was basically, dismantled without giving them a proper assessment or a proper chance to develop on some regional grounds. How basically the Western Germans subdued the East to their needs, and how it also had an impact on social questions, on stereotypes, and even on discriminations of people who can be identified as the Eastern Germans. Because in Germany you can be identified even by your accent, from what region you come. There are very different regional dialects, and well, you want, if you come from Saxony, the region in the south, like Dresden, Leipzig, this area, you will be identified in the West, and you can be mocked as this lazy Aussie person from the East, for instance.
Wow, interesting, fascinating.
Yeah. So, given in this context, I am really not surprised that many of the Eastern Germans voted for a party that promised them that Germany will become great again. Their tradition, they will be again important. Their dignity will be boosted up. And I also like to remind that immediately after the reunification, it was the left that actually had the lead in the East. The regions such as Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, or the region in the German Baltic, which is the part of the East, where for a long time they had social democratic and Die Linke majorities in the local parliaments and also on the local level. So the AfD is basically taking over a lot of people who are disappointed with the left. And now it is the left's task to start their rebuilding themselves in these areas as well.
Yeah, because as I mentioned in my previous monologue about all the different dynamics, it was the SPD with the Greens in coalition during the 1990s, which unleashed a lot of brutal austerity, economic shock therapy, shock doctrine, and whatnot onto Germany as it was just reunifying. It was the SPD with the Greens that unleashed a lot of austerity on the German people, and that working class base in the East and elsewhere were rightly so demoralized and whatnot, and that led to the Christian Democrats having a huge comeback, and I think safe to say for a lot of German leftists or left leaning folks, there is a feeling of just apathy and just disconnection between between German politics. Many who say a version of they're all the same. There's not a difference between SPD, the CDU, the Free Democratic Party, and even the Green Party. So I think it's also important to mention that.
Yeah.
Last, very briefly, why do you think Sahara didn't advance?
With the Zahra Wagenknecht party that we left behind. I think that what I spoke about the Eastern Germany is a very good bridge to this question, because Zahra Wagenknecht tried to, in my view, she tried to present an alternative basically to this kind of people. Those who still stand for a social-oriented program, but who are, let's say, lost, who are in these new times, who also are skeptical against migration. And indeed, Eastern Germans are skeptical against immigration. There is a widespread feeling that their part of country didn't really recover from the reunification, let's say, they didn't get the proper chance to develop, and then suddenly there comes the globalization process, everything start to change again. So there is is one shock therapy or shock without therapy after another. So she basically tried to address these kind of voters who stand for social state, but who are reluctant towards this, let's say, identitarian part. When you when you affirm the LGBT people, where affirm Black history, where you affirm also where you accept that the future of the Germany will be multicultural and you need to deal with this. So she tried to offer this kind of, let's say, socialism for Germans and Germans only. And why this failed? Well, I'd say because if you have an original and a copy to choose, then you will go for the original. I mean, those who really stood for the social program could find the social program in Die Linke. And those who cared more about kicking the migrants out, they simply stuck to AfD, especially that there is this confusion that I still can't explain, that there is this confusion that AfD supposedly could bring more welfare to ordinary people, which is completely not the case. There is nothing in their program that suggests they would be somehow hurting the interests of the big capital. No, they will not.
Not even trying to play like a little bit of footsie with the left, like what like what the National Front or the National Rassemblement Republic or what even yours truly, the Law and Justice Party does.
Yes.
Also play footsie with some left programs, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'd say that, Wagenknecht's party was simply unconvincing in all that. They tried to mix things that don't really go together. And in the end, well, there was a small potential in this thinking, but not big enough to overcome.
As a leftist who is socially liberal and economically left, I love it when stuff like that absolutely fails. I hate it when leftists play footsie with the right and stupid things of the right, like with the anti-woke nonsense and so forth. So, anyways, great for me, and let's hope that's lesson learned. And something like that happened in England with George Galloway. Funnily enough, my last question I have to ask you is this: what do the German working class and precarious middle class folk have to look forward to with a possible CDU-led coalition government? Because in terms of economic affairs in Germany, and what do EU NATO citizens have to look forward to, particularly those of your region, Eastern Europe and the pigs, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain. And what does answer those questions, and then I'll ask about the international community folks. So the German working class and precarious middle class, in terms of socio-economic affairs, what do they have to look forward to with the CDU-led government, and what does this recent German election, what implications do EU and NATO citizens have to look forward to?
Well, the working class can't expect anything good. I'm very sorry to say that, but there is they can expect more militarization, and they can expect more warfare spending and less welfare spending. And while the Social Democrats should theoretically say in this moment that if we want to go to war, then the rich should finance this to the more extent, I am pretty sure they are not going to say this. So the working class can expect a more turbulent time, and a time when resistance will be really necessary to safeguard what is remaining of the welfare state of Germany, and what is left of the once powerful social institutions, including the trade unions of Germany. So there will be more struggles for the working class of this, I am sure, and I am really hopeful that the left, as the Linke party, will not lose the potential, the momentum they have just gained. A lot of hopes are being now put on them, and it is up to them to live up to these hopes.
And
about the international context.
Particularly, what do EU NATO citizens have to look forward to with the possible incoming German government, particularly Eastern Europe and PIGS, which is Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain, in which the German-led EU has enforced grotesque austerity on all of those countries. So.
Well, here I think that at least for some time, Germany will be less active on the international arena because they have their own internal economic turmoil to be resolved. And I think that the CDU leader is perfectly aware that if he does not stop the recession, or if he does not stop the desindustrialization, or that if he is unable to do anything about, the turbulences in German economy, then it will be the far right that will only profit from this. So while he has adopted so much of the program of the far right, he is not doing this in order to see then the far right steal his voters. So this will be his first concern. As far as the international system is concerned, I think that Germany's government will be now waiting for a moment to see how the situation develops, because Germany actually can find itself in both constellations. If there is a peace signed with Russia, and if there will be a signal from the US that we return to business as usual with Russia, you can be sure that Germany will go in the first row of those who want to repair the bilateral relations and then do the business again. It is only a question how could Russia react to this, but in this if the Americans give the green light, then you can be sure that the Germans will try return to what they had. The second option is that there are more efforts on the European part to win the so-called Europe strategic autonomy, which could also mean the build-up of European military force, or a more cooperation in military area. And here there we come at an essential contradiction, because without Germany and without Germany's involvement, there will be no common military force of Europe, or no significant force of any kind that could ensure the strategic autonomy. But on the other hand, there are powerful players on the continent, and France in the first place, that namely don't want this to happen. So don't want a strong Germany again. So, because, in the world without rules, we went back in time already with Trump. Why we can go back again to the beginning of the 20th century? So you see, there is this contradiction which won't be easily resolved. And as far as the Central and Eastern and Southeastern European countries are concerned, this is indeed a very interesting question, because many of them rely very much on the trade connections with Germany. So export to Germany or German investment is an absolutely key issue for Czechia, for Poland as well. But not only, there is also German presence in Hungary. It is a less known fact, but Germany is just behind China. Germany is the biggest foreign country investing in Hungary, despite all the criticism of what is Orban doing there. Germany has also a role to play in Romania, and what Germany did to Greece. So the whole Europe watched how they forced them into austerity and how they basically ruined both their economy and the democratic principles. So here I see two possible scenarios, like Germany trying to build up a bloc together with some of the Central European countries.
To have NATO without the US.
Yeah, but
the European army.
Also, Germany needs good relations, for instance, with Poland, also for other reasons, such as migration policy. Namely, there will be no big deportations of people, illegal illegal migrants to Germany if Poland doesn't accept them. Because a fair share of those who are in Germany and who are now being deemed ineligible for international protection are people who came through Polish territory, through Belarus, through this migration route. If Poland said no, we are not taking them back, then Germany would have some problem. But as far as I know, and as far as we have seen, Donald Tusk is not saying no.
Unbelievable. And I think also when it comes to the international community, we should actually, for folks in Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, West Asia, I think, what can they expect with Germany? Germany is a partner in crime to the American-led empire, and I think under this German government, we'll still see more aggression in Latin American affairs, trying to overthrow Maduro in Venezuela, Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, and other countries which are left wing and push back against the unjust status quo. And of course, whatever the U.S., Britain, Canada, and so forth are doing in Africa, Germany is often a partner in crime there. So anti-imperialist movements, both in Germany and globally, must continue to mobilize. So I think that's a perfect place to end. Well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1, our all things Ukraine and Germany edition, with the Polish independent journalist Małgorzata Kulbaczewska-Figat of Cross Border Talks. Please check out their website, their YouTube channel for interesting and often great coverage on Eastern Europe and all of Europe and international affairs from a left-leaning perspective. Małgorzata, thanks so much for taking the time to come. And next time we have you on, we have to have you back on to discuss Polish affairs and your assessment of Donald Tusk's political comeback and how you think your country is faring under that EU, win back who's back in office there.
I can only say that you can imagine what is my assessment of Donald Tusk's government, but I will be happy to say more when the right time comes. So thank you for your invitation.
Very welcome. You're very welcome. Oh yes. Oh, and folks, don't forget, please help 1+1 overcome overcome the far right algorithms by sharing widely past episodes, new episodes, and whatnot. And also don't forget to donate to 1+1. We're independent media, so any donations is greatly appreciated. And until then, good night and good luck.